It's Bill's Sunday, but we got a Sabres game to react to, a comeback victory over Chicago. We'll break it down. I got some tweets to explain myself for, and the goat head of the night. All ahead here on the Locked On Sabres podcast.
You're Locked On Sabres, your daily podcast on the Buffalo Sabres. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Sabres your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, where you can watch our show. I got my Bills gear on for today's episode. You know, it's a Sabres win, but it's a post-game win reaction show, but we got a Sunday, so Bills and Packers tonight. Thought I'd rep the one Buffalo scheme. I got the Sabre flag over here, a bunch of stuff behind me. You know, the studio's starting to come together a little bit. A 5-3 win. The Sabres erase a 2-goal deficit in the third period to beat Chicago. We will go through it here on the show. I'll give away the goat head of the night for the team's best player against Chicago. And also, I got a new segment idea that I want to test the waters with today, called Explain Yourself. Just going through my tweets and explaining them and kind of breaking them down further. Because really, it ends up being, we were doing my notebook for the game. My notebook ends up just being what I put up on Twitter. Because if I write something down, I usually just tweet it. So Explain Yourself coming up today for the first time ever. But what a victory. A fun victory for any Sabre fan that was in the crowd. A nice Saturday night game. The weather was nice. Little walk to the arena to and from wasn't bad. Maybe you went out after with it being a Saturday night. But if you go to Sabres and Bills games, the Bills game's a night game, so you didn't have to wake up early to tailgate or anything. It was a really cool night to be in the arena and a really cool night in the city. And the Sabres getting the victory the way they did. Hey, hopefully you stayed in attendance and you didn't leave early. And you could have, they were down 2 with 8 minutes to go. So I would have taken some commitment there, but a fun victory nonetheless. The Sabres get the win. They were led by 2 men. If you were in attendance, you only heard 2 goal songs on the night. You heard Victor Olofsson's goal song and you heard Tage Thompson's goal song. Thompson with 2 goals late. The first to get within 1, and then the second to tie it. Olofsson finishes it off in overtime, and it was a good victory for the Buffalo Sabres, and also a victory where they were definitively the best team throughout. It was frustrating, mind-blowing, whatever you want, that the Sabres were in that. They were down in that game. They dominated the first period, came away 1-1. The second period was a little bit more even, and Chicago finds the net twice. Third period, again, all Sabres, and it was all Sabres throughout. They end up outshooting Chicago on the night 45-26. They shot attempts in this game 64 for Buffalo to 38 for Chicago. So they get 62.7% of the shot attempts that went their way. Scoring chances in this game, 34 for the Sabres, 23 for Chicago. High danger scoring chances, 16 for Buffalo, 11 for Chicago. The expected goals for rate in this game, 58% for the Sabres and just under 42% for Chicago. And that's not surprising. The Blackhawks, I did a crossover episode with Jack Bushman from the Locked On Blackhawks, and that's available on his YouTube channel. If you're looking to check it out, we kind of have a whole season's worth of talk about both teams. Chicago's not a good team. They are not a good team. They are trying to tank. They have not necessarily had bad results so far this year, but they made a lot of rebuilding type trades, getting rid of Alex DeBrincat in the offseason, getting rid of a couple of other veteran players that have been helpful for them, and not really bringing anybody else back in. And there have been rumors, of course, about trading Jonathan Tage and Patrick Kane. This team's expected to be bad. And losing 3 in a row, 3 teams that are supposed to be bad in Seattle, Montreal, and Chicago would have been a tough pill to swallow. So good on the Sabres to get back in that one and get the result, because it would have been a dark morning, I think, coming off of those 3 losses in a row had that happened. But they didn't. They did not let it happen. On the score sheet for the Sabres in this game, looking through some of the stats on their end, Victor Olofsson gets the goal scoring started. The 6:19 mark in the first period on the power play. The Sabres power play is starting to come around just a little bit. I like Olofsson being on that wall. If there's one thing he's good at, it's being that hired gun on the side that just, can rip one-timers, put the puck in the back of the net. And it wasn't that hard for him, right? He's down on one knee. He has to go down on one knee, and it's not the greatest angle, but the goaltender for Chicago, he is way out. He's way out. Why is the name of the Chicago netminder escaping me? You know why it's escaping me? This is funny. I'm gonna put this up on my YouTube channel. I had the name Soderstrom, and I went to look up his name on ESPN. Chicago doesn't have him registered. ESPN doesn't have him registered. So you'll scroll down. Craig Anderson is listed under goaltender. So this guy is so off the radar for ESPN that he's not even listed because they just don't have him in their database. But anyways, he played great on the night for Chicago, but he's out of position on that first goal, and Olofsson is able to put the puck in the back of the net for his 5th of the season. Jason Dickinson for Chicago then scores to tie the game up at 1 apiece. Second period, Sam Lafferty and Taylor Radish get the 2 goals to put Chicago up 3-1. And then the third period that belonged to Tage Thompson. And what sparked Tage Thompson on that line was taking Alex Tuch off, putting Kyle Okposo on. Okposo did great. He started both plays that ended up in Thompson goals. The first of which, Okposo cuts into the slot. He gets a good shot, a good scoring opportunity on net, and then Thompson's able to clean up the rebound. The second goal, Okposo doing some dirty work behind the net, is able to get it to Jeff Skinner, and Skinner ends up passing it to Thompson. So a great job by Okposo on that line in the third period. I'd love to see them continue to go with that 3 into their next game. Okposo gets 2 assists. He gets his 3rd and 4th assists of the season on the 2 Thompson goals. Thompson now up to 3 goals on the year. Skinner does get 2 assists in the game as well. So I like that line a lot. Thompson, Okposo, and Skinner. One other thing that is not a part of my Explain Yourself segment, which we'll get to coming up next year, I think Jack Quinn is about to break through. Jack Quinn has been playing a lot more consistently. The giveaways have really shriveled up. They really aren't existent anymore. He's getting a lot of good scoring opportunities. He looks like he's playing with more confidence. He's trying moves that he's capable of. He is skating hard, or like fast even. He's going to the middle of the ice. He looks like he's playing a little less timid, and I think the Sabres are about to get a lot of results from him. So Jack Quinn, although he hasn't been putting it up on the stat sheet in the last couple of games, he has been, I think he's about to be putting it up on the stat sheet. In terms of some of his advanced numbers on the night that kind of point to that, shot attempts in this game, when Quinn was on the ice, 17 for the Sabres, 3 for Chicago. So his line was dominant when they were on the ice. An expected goals for rate percentage in this game for Jack Quinn of 87.5%. That's an incredible number for him. So Quinn is, I think, about to break through. We'll come back. We'll try a segment out. Twitter, explain yourself. I got some tweets that I sent out. It's kind of my notebook, but it's in Twitter form. So we'll do that when we come back before I give away Sabres Goat Head of the Night. And we sail across the Atlantic. We'll do that because the Atlantic Division is getting very interesting, even in the first couple of weeks of the season. That's ahead here on the Locked On Sabres podcast with Joe DiBiase. Our podcast is brought to you by betonline.net. It's your number one source for betting hockey, but also football, the start of the NBA season, the World Series. Find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth analysis on every game. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sports wagering information, with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including MMA, boxing, and golf as well. Head to their website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. Joe DiBiase back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. All right, let's try out a new segment. It's called Explain Yourself. I got some tweets that I sent out in the course of the Sabres victory over Chicago that we're going to run through, and I am going to explain in greater detail. So you can follow along on YouTube. I'll put the tweets up in visual form as well. So let's start with my first tweet of the night. Need this hat and need the NHL to go back to this logo full time. It was a quote tweet from Michael Ryan of the Dan Levitard show, who was in Buffalo. He's in Buffalo for the Packers-Bills game, and he decided to go to Sabres and Blackhawks as well. And Mike Ryan and his, I believe his wife, have old school vintage NHL hats. So the old NHL crest that went the other way, the diagonal NHL goes left to right and from top to bottom, and it's that orange color instead of the black and silver that they presently have. I love that hat. It's a black hat. I want it. And also, the NHL does need to go back to that logo full time. I think that logo is way better. It's so much sharper. It's got the color to it that I like. I'll put a poll up at Locked On Sabres. The NHL, that might be a runaway though. The NHL should go back to their original crest that they got rid of in 2006. My next tweet from the night is that the first time in NHL history a player has scored, had it called back on a review, and then scored again, but even earlier on the clock. Victor Olofsson literally went back in time in this game. He scored a goal. It was reviewed for offside. They took the goal away, and also because it was offsides 15 seconds earlier, they had to reset the clock. So Olofsson scored with what was the exact time? Olofsson scored with at the 6:19 mark of the first period. I believe his original goal was at the 6:10 mark. So Olofsson basically went back in time 9 seconds and scored a goal because he scored it right off the draw after the review and then the delay with the panel of glass. Is that the first time an NHL player has ever done that? I wonder, because I think it might be, but that's a tough way to look it up. By the way, a little shout out to Matt Beauvais. What a great tweet after that goal. Puck don't lie. So Olofsson scores, it gets taken away, and then he immediately scores again. Loved puck don't lie. And Finn agrees. All right, our next tweet on the night. Olofsson, for that depth defenseman they would want, would be a fine trade. So Victor Olofsson, he's going to get some props from me coming up here in just a little bit. But I have not been impressed with Victor Olofsson throughout his Sabres career. He has developed his shot, and that's the one thing that he is great at. But I do not believe that he is an all-around quality hockey player. He's very average to below average in every other facet of his game. And while he was great on the night, he scored 2 goals, I would still be very willing and open to trading him, because also it's not like his age really fits for what the Sabres are going for. They're trying to build it up young. They're trying to get it guys that are before the primes of their careers so that they all kind of hit the primes of their career together. Olofsson's already in it. He's 27 years old, and he's fine. He's good. He's a good goal scorer, but certainly someone that I think the Sabres should be willing to part with if there's a good trade out there for a defenseman. But I got a lot of fans kind of spitting back at, okay, wait a minute, he's our most accomplished goal scorer on the team. He's our most consistent goal scorer on the team. One, he's not, because that is definitely Tage Thompson and also Skinner when he's at his best. But I get it. Olofsson scores goals on a team that doesn't have a lot of guys you can count on night to night for that. So I'm not rushing him out the door, forcing him out the door. But as I said there, I would be on board if they decided to sell Olofsson and get a player on the blue line. My next tweet on the night. Why today did Anderson decide to pull out his Hasek impression? And then I had to follow up and say, and not in a good way. I wanted people to know that that wasn't me saying that Dominic Hasek, he's doing his best impression and that he's stopping everything. Anderson was doing a lot of flopping on Saturday night against Chicago. Did anybody else notice that? He was flopping around. He was going down, trying to stack the pads. He was, diving behind him with his glove along the ice. Just not great form from Craig Anderson. It's almost a game you'd expect from a rookie playing his first NHL game. I don't know if he just kind of lost his mind for a couple of those plays and thought he was Dominic Hasek, but Anderson, a couple of those goals by Chicago, I just didn't like the way he played them. The one where they challenge it for goaltender interference, where he's literally on his side along the ice. I did not like that from Craig Anderson. My next tweet from the night that we'll go through. Seasons with 80-plus points. Jonathan Tage, 1. Derek Roy, 1. So, my I've always kind of had this take that Jonathan Tage is overrated. Um, and this kind of just is, it's a little shot. It's a little twist of the knife in that take. The fact that Jonathan Tage only has 1 in his career. And tonight, the Sabres are playing Chicago, so I think it's a good opportunity as always to do it. And he had a bad game. I didn't think Tage was very good. He takes a penalty late in the third period that ends up costing his team the win. But I just thought it was interesting that Tage has 1 season in the 80s for points, and Derek Roy had 1 in the 80s for points. Tage, I get it. He's the intangibles guy. He's going to go down to history. He's one of the greatest leaders in NHL history, but he was never really an elite player, in my opinion, at one time. He was always really good, but always got a little bit more credit than I thought he deserved. The last one that we'll go through in the Explain Yourself segment. Sabres need a Max Afinogenov guy where every time he goes through the neutral zone with speed, the crowd gets up on their feet. Remember that used to happen with Afinogenov? Everybody would always get up on their feet because they thought something special was about to happen because he would be zooming through the zone at 100 miles per hour. The Sabres don't have a guy like that where they come through the neutral zone with speed and you're expecting something special to happen. And I got a lot of replies of, well, they had that guy and they traded him to Vegas. That's right. Eichel was that. But just because we're happy with the Eichel return and we're happy that Eichel is now, we're moved on past that era of Sabres hockey, doesn't mean they don't need a guy like Eichel. They need a guy that is super fast and can control the puck and is an amazing stick handler. I think the Sabres do need that elite offensive force. Now, I will say this. I do think they might have the guy in the organization, but I'm not sure he's on the team. A lot of people want to tell me JJ Peterka is that guy. That might be right. I think the guy most likely to be this player goes through the neutral zone, everybody gets up because they think something special could happen. I think the guy for that is Matthew Savoie. I think when Savoie gets here, he might turn into that player, but he certainly isn't that, of course, right now because he's not on the team. So anyways, that is our first edition of Explain Yourself after the Sabres win over Chicago. We'll come back, give away the Sabres GOAT Head of the Night, and we'll sail across the Atlantic here in the Locked On Sabres podcast with Joe DiBiase. Welcome back to the Locked On Sabres podcast with Joe DiBiase at Sneaky Joe Sports on Twitter, at Locked On Sabres on Twitter. If you want to shoot us a question or a comment on YouTube or on Twitter, we're always reading them on the podcast if you're looking to get involved with the show. Sabres GOAT Head of the Night. Their best player on the night was Victor Olofsson. You can't deny it from Olofsson. Even though I argued maybe he should be traded during the middle of the game, I do think Olofsson was worthy of being the best player for the Sabres. 2 goals. It really was 3, right? He scores, it gets reviewed, it gets taken away, he scores again. 3 times we heard his goal song. 3 times he put the puck in the back of the net. So I'm going to give it to Olofsson tonight. 1, he opens the scoring on the power play in the first period, and then he gets the game winner on the power play in overtime. And also 5-on-5. I mean, he scores 2 power play goals, but 5-on-5, Olofsson was great. Shot attempts for Olofsson. He was number 1 of the team in Corsi for percentage, number 1 in Fenwick percentage, number 1 in expected goals for. His expected goals for was 98%. 98% is incredible. Olofsson, 18 shots for the Sabres while he was on the ice at 5-on-5 and 3 for the Blackhawks. And that was that line playing great overall of Olofsson, Quinn, and Middlestat. But he was great. He was phenomenal, even at 5-on-5. Just a great overall all-around game for Olofsson. And he was able to put the puck in the back of the net twice. He was the game's second star. Tage Thompson was the game's first star. All right, quick sail across the Atlantic before we wrap things up on today's show. And I focus on football for the rest of the day. On Saturday night, a lot of teams in action in the Atlantic Division, which we'll put the standings up in a second here. Everyone's playing really well right now to start the year in the division. Florida and Ottawa played on Saturday night for an intra-division matchup. Florida wins the game 5-3 to improve to 5-3-1 on the season. Brandon Montour, former Sabre, was the game's first star with a goal and 2 assists. The Panthers had 58 shots in this game. 58 shots. So they were all over Ottawa. In fact, Anton Forsberg got the game's third star despite giving up 5 because he had 53 saves. Second, imagine that. Who gets a star of the game when they allow 5 goals? Detroit gets another win on their resume for the season, 2-1 over the Minnesota Wild to improve to 4-2-2 on the season. Montreal gets back in the win column. They have a winning record even now at 5-4 with a 7-4 win over the St. Louis Blues. The most interesting game of the night, though, I think in the Atlantic Division was the Toronto Maple Leafs falling again, this time to the LA Kings by a score of 4-2. Toronto now 4-4-1 on the season. They are right at 500, and they also have tied with Ottawa the lowest point percentage in the division this year. So, as the Atlantic Division currently stands, we've got Boston in first at 16 points. We've got Florida in second at 11 points. I know Boston 8-1. They've been unstoppable this year. The Sabres, Detroit, Canadiens, Lightning, all tied with 10 points. The Sabres and Red Wings have done it in 8 games, and the Sabres have, 5 wins. Detroit has 4. They have the 2 overtime losses, so the Sabres currently in the third spot. The Sabres also have the second best goal differential in the division with +7. Boston +18. They're through the roof. Ottawa, actually, who's in last, has a +3, and then Florida and Detroit are at +1. But the Sabres are the second best goal differential at +7. And then you've got Toronto with 9 points in 9 games, Ottawa with 8 points in 8 games. So everybody in the Atlantic Division is 500 or better. A lot of that has to do with the Atlantic is beating up on the West. The Sabres beat up on the West a little bit. The Red Wings are doing it a little bit. I think they're just winning their games cross conference is kind of allowing for the fact that they are all above 500. So a great start to the year for the Atlantic Division, and it's going to be ultra competitive as the season progresses if the Sabres want to keep clawing their way into that top 4. All right, that's going to do it for us here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. So the Sabres week to come. A couple of more home games before they get back on the road. Monday night against the Detroit Red Wings, another Atlantic Division matchup. Then the Sabres host the Pittsburgh Penguins. It's a Wednesday 7:30 puck drop. I believe that's because that game is going to be nationally televised on ESPN. So 7:30 on Wednesday against Pittsburgh, and then Friday night at Carolina, Saturday night at Tampa Bay. And then we're inching closer to Jack Eichel's return, November 10th. We are just over a week away from the Sabres hosting the Golden Knights, and that place will be electric, I'd imagine, for that game. So that's going to do it for us today here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. Now go make your second listen, Locked On Game to Game, NHL. Every moment, every top performance, every result, Locked On Game to Game covers every game across the NHL with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NHL, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Talk to you tomorrow here on Locked On Sabres.